and officially welcome all of you to the Stockbridge Library, Museum, and Archives online poetry series. We are in our second year, as many of you know, and the theme for this year's program is the Refuge of Witnessing. Today's session, we're very lucky to have with us two poets, so a duet of poets. Susana and Margo Taft are here with us to read and share a little bit about the process of their work. And they will be in conversation with John Gillespie, who is the former president of the Board of Trustees here at the Stockbridge Library, Museum, and Archives. And in addition, John really was the seed for this program. He has brought poetry into our lives at noon on Thursdays for 2 years now. So John, thank you on behalf of all of us, and I'll turn the program over to you.
No, great. No, thanks, Wendy. No, this is a real treat. As I tell people, I get to recharge myself into the poetry wall every week. So, you know, it's like your electric car, except this is poetry. And Myra, it lasts a lot longer. It lasts for like 7 days. You don't have to recharge again. That's what's great about poetry. No, welcome. And, you know, for those of you that don't, you know, obviously I do this every week, but, you know, to have two poets on the same time is, you know, I feel like it goes from arithmetic to geometric, you know, because, you know, conversations spark off each other. So it's really a nice experience today.
Margo and I have a relationship that dates back to 2002. So recently we have been doing a number of events as a team together, which has been an interesting and rewarding experience.
Yeah, that's great. So Susana, let's start with you. What does refuge mean to you now, and where do you find it?
I think it's hard to find it now, quite frankly. I would, to me, love, home, work, these are for me all places where I can escape. But I mean, even there are kind of quirks to it. For example, even though I find home a refuge, my apartment in New York City, probably that's not thought of as a refuge for many people, but it is for me. And yet I when I get up in the morning, I tend to avoid looking at the news for at least a few minutes. I'll play Wordle instead because it's a way of just delaying the inevitable. But I live with someone, I have a husband who's usually the first words out of his mouth every morning is some variation of "we're doomed, look what's in the news." So there, in that sense, it's very hard to get away from you know, what's really happening and have any kind of refuge.
Great. And do you see people kind of, I guess, leaving their refuges and going out to embrace the world again, or do you see people still kind of in New York City hunkering down?
I think everyone wants to get out. In fact, I have a poem precisely about that, which comes at the pandemic very obliquely, but is definitely a statement about wanting to, I mean, look, everybody is still, well, I wouldn't say everybody is still cautious. The people in my social circle tend to be fairly cautious, but that doesn't mean that we want to stay home anymore. I mean, in 2020, in the spring of 2020, I didn't leave my apartment for about 90 days, except in the middle of the night to get the mail. It was so fraught that even touching the mail seemed to be potentially dangerous. I had suspended my paper copy of the New York Times because it wasn't clear if you could even touch the New York Times. So I switched to the online version, and we'd get the mail in the middle of the night because we figured there was less chance of running into another person. I'm on the 8th floor, so you had to take an elevator. You didn't want to be in an elevator with anyone else. In fact, it was against the rules of the building to be in an elevator with anybody else. So I don't think anyone's still doing anything like that, or most people are not doing anything like that. In fact, the last thing that I hadn't done for 2 years was to go to a concert in a music club. And this month is the first time I did that in 2 years.
Yeah, I'm going to write down the not touching the New York Times, because when we moved to Stockbridge, Mass, in the inconsistent delivery, so I had to give up the physical papers and go with digital. But I often felt like opening up the New York Times was like touching, a version of the Bible. And it was just very special and something to look forward to every day. So yeah, not being able to do that or not wanting to do that. So why don't you read that poem, and then we'll switch over to Margo.
Okay, so this is a poem called Extraordinary Streets, and it starts off in a very different place, but it ends with that. Extraordinary Streets. Winters remind me of an old black and white film, people on the sidewalks of Moscow, breaths scouring the air. They carried big blocks of frozen milk. My first thought, not of the cold, but shock that anyone could drink that much milk. Good thing my grandparents all fled. That kind of life not suited to me. Vodka in vending machines, of which I think there could never be enough. Years of daily lines for bread. I prefer to peel off a lighter coat, maybe a hip leather moto jacket or no coat, to write about anything other than death. I've been working on that for years, which is why I'll end now with a ruffled blue silk dress I put on today to float down East End Avenue after lockdown, practicing walking again in heels.
Nice. So Margo, what does refuge mean to you, and where do you find it nowadays?
Well, I was going to begin by reading a poem by Dorian Lux, which is a poem that is about refuge in a way, the attempt to find refuge, but in a way, not finding it in a kind of that. I mean, I have several poems that are about that. The Garden, but this is by Dorian Lux. The Garden by Dorian Lux. We were talking about poetry. We were talking about nuclear war. She said she couldn't write about it because she couldn't imagine it. I said it was simple. Imagine this doorknob is the last thing you will see in this world. Imagine you happen to be standing at the door when you look down, about to grasp the knob, your fingers curled toward it, the doorknob old and black with oil from being turned so often in your hand, cranky with rust and grease from the kitchen. Imagine it happens this quickly before you have time to think of anything else. Your kids, your own life, what it will mean. You reach for the knob and the window flares white, though you see it only from the corner of your eye because you're looking at the knob, intent on opening the back door to the patch of sunlight on the porch, that garden, spread below the stairs and the single tomato you might pick for a salad. But when the flash comes, you haven't thought that far ahead. It is only the simple desire to move into the sun that possesses you. The thought of the garden, that tomato, would have come after you had taken the knob in your hand, just beginning to twist it. And when the window turns white, you are only about to touch it, preparing to open the door. And I think what's so brilliant about that poem is it talks about what we are seeking, which is refuge in some way, in this case, the garden and nature, and yet what we're also destroying. And I just think that's, anyway, a very powerful poem, I think.
So where do you find refuge now?
Well, I find refuge in nature and in poetry and in my house, actually, as Susana was saying, definitely. those are three areas that definitely provide. And I can read one of my own refuge poems that I've never read at a reading before, but it's about a refuge in relationship. Refuge of and it's from my new book, The End of Horses, which was just published this month by Broadstone Books. And Susana also has a new book with Broadstone that she'll be talking and reading from. This poem is titled Refuge of Constellations. White moons, satin north, star, lunar signs, refuge of whiteness, soughing the topmost branches at twilight, bells ring the changeable sea, haven of flowers, red marjoram, lupine, willows, veils of summer rain, dune grass protecting margins of land from sea, filigree of fragrant gold jessamine, crinoline, sounds first awakening, a dwelling you celebrate this wedding day, sacred vows, seaside church, love wakens to the garden of dowagers, plovers, the blue-gray dove. It was actually a poem I wrote for someone who was getting married, so.
Nice, very nice.
One of the things about being in the apartment, within the last 2 years and trying to find some kind of refuge there is that right before my building locked down, we had been in the process of renovating the bathroom. And so the entire bathroom was demolished. And then the following day, the building shut down. So we lived with fortunately, there was another small one in the back, but the main one was, well, they hauled out all the rubble, but it was just an empty space. And in the living room were piles of tiles, a toilet, a sink, a vanity, all the usual things in 4 piles in the living room. So it was kind of like not even a sort of soothing space for 4 months until they unlocked the building. And when they unlocked the building again and people could finally come back in, it was still sort of scary because everybody was potentially infectious, but we were desperate to have people come in and work on the bathroom. And I wrote a poem about what was happening at the time called Sheltering. And I think I'd like to read that now.
Yeah, good.
It seems relevant. Let me just pull it up. Okay. Sheltering. My weekly Italian tutor asks me if I feel safe about his coming to teach me. He calls himself a potential viral vector. Certo, I assure him, knowing he needs the work. There are 2 men parked in my bathroom, carefully installing tile. Mornings, we bump elbows in greeting because we don't share a language and none of us are the type that prays. In the late 1800s, it was mysophobia, thought pathological, the constant washing of one's hands. Now we all scrub prudently and hesitate to pet dogs. There's no such thing as truly safe, a word which originally meant uninjured. All of us are injured as in shops around the world, people push one another out of the way over toilet paper and sanitizer, hoards Chef Boyardee and rice. In the early 1900s, when TB spread, men shaved off their long beards. Women wore shortened skirts. When that didn't stop disease, they blamed immigrants, like the ones in my apartment, slowly building a ceramic wall for a shower stall, not the kind of wall for keeping out, a soft gray one for stepping in. This was, of course, during the time when we had the monster in power, and there was a lot of talk about building walls.
Yeah, nice. Very, very nice. Do you have another refuge poem to read?
Sure. This is from the new book, The Damage Done. I don't know if you can see it, from Broadstone. I put the link, by the way, in the chat for Broadstone Books, and I put Margo's website and my website and the titles of both our books if anyone is interested. So this is a poem from what's a very long narrative. The book is actually a very long narrative sequence broken into parts, with a central character named Janie. And this is, her life is told in a series of flashbacks, since she is dead at the beginning of the book. But this is flashback, I just want to make love to you. Because Janie's would-be lover thinks the husband is inattentive, because he wants to tell her whatever she needs to hear, because she's shown up with her checkbook and the organization has unpaid bills, because she's played the seduction game before, just has to ignore her disgust toward her body, because Isaac Hayes is good background music for getting it on, because she likes the untethered anonymity, thinks this man undressing her with his mind doesn't have a clue about her life, has too much swagger, because in fact he's odd, knows damn well she's semi-famous, because they both know if you're drinking black coffee, first kisses taste bitter, because of the weed, he notices the sunset. It's cottony mauve red, matches the embroidery on her jeans.
Intriguing. Yeah, very nice.
Kind of out of context because of the flow of the narrative, but it's one of the few poems in there about love.
Yeah, nice. Margo, another poem about refuge?
Sure, I'll read another one from The End of Horses. It was actually first published in the late 90s, but I included it in this book. Treehouse, something about roots, bone-like, tenacious, that grip the moving ground. The branches like umbrellas bent back and broken by the storm. The leaves feigned references to hands and the sound of the wind's wild working against the leaves. The boy collected the branches and stored them under his bed. Something about the tree seeped into his dreams, the trunk a hallway, the branches outlined rooms, and his family finding shelter in the boughs, listening to the sound language of leaves. He did not see a garden, apples, or any fires. Everyone huddled together to keep warm.
Very nice. So let's have a little audience participation. If you want to ask a question, make a comment, you could put that in the chat and I'll read it. You know, we like to, this season, we have a little more interaction, so you can ask some specific questions of Susana or Margo. You don't have to, but we like to have a time when you can do that. Anybody have something
I can ask a question. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you both for reading. It's lovely to hear you. Yeah, Susana, we haven't met, but we're actually press mates with Broadstone.
I know. I was at your
it's great to hear you read.
Yeah.
And I love hearing Margo read too. Anyway, my question is really about, I guess I'm just thinking about refuge as like a physical place, but that specifically nourishes something interior. And what I'm noticing about the pieces that you're reading, there's so much attention to what is around the speaker. And I'd love to hear any kind of responses or insights that you have of that relationship between the internal and external when it comes to refuge. Like, how do those correspond for you?
I don't, for me, what's around me is going to determine whether or not I feel safe, I suppose, but I think it also, some of it is coming from making a real attempt at this point in my poems to kind of get away from too much interiority and trying to pull in more of the outside world so that it's just not about whatever is going on in my head. So I think it might be that you're responding to that. And I guess that means I've been able to do it more, which is a good thing for me, because I think I began to feel I wanted to do more than just have a bunch of poems in which I talked about I wanted different points of view and work that wasn't necessarily focused on me per se, but more, perhaps social issues or history.
How about you, Margo?
Well, I was trying to think of how I would respond to the question, and I believe that my point of view really has to do with depending on what the poem is, because I've written a lot of poems that really are about interiority and don't deal so much with the outside world, but then other poems, and I guess maybe more of my more recent poems definitely are not about, are about the outside world and dealing with it, because I guess, I do feel that we're in a really critical situation right now where poems of witness are really more important than maybe more important than ever, just because we've never been in a historical period where we're facing the apocalypse and you can see it in front of you. And if we don't do anything, we know our grandchildren and generations after that are going to have a terrible life. And so I think it's more important than ever to speak the truth in some form, which is more difficult than any other kind of poetry as well, because it gets into political poetry, and it's always difficult to write political poetry without being polemical. And that's the critical key. You can't just start preaching to people because nobody wants to be preached to, but you have to try to say things in a way that we can hear it. So that's the trick. And yet we're in this bind and we have to face this. And we're also in an age of huge disinformation. And if no one is trying to combat that with what's really happening, and I think it's critically important for poets to start working as hard as ever and for people to come together to fight against the tyrannical forces that are trying to take over.
Yeah, great. We got a chat, a comment, a question from Kathy Haley. Susana, you mentioned grandparents fleeing from Moscow. Have you written other poems about your ancestors as refugees or your connections to that? And then Kathy, the second section of today is, we will hear from Margo with, one of her political poems of witness. So that's usually we're trying to, the whole thing is we're trying to separate the two, but basically they end up being baked in the same pie, as I call it. They just start folding in on each other. So,
yeah.
Susana, yeah, go ahead.
My mother's side of the family actually fled from Poland. My father's side from what is now Belarus and what is now Ukraine. So, but the borders of all those places, they keep changing like particularly mid-century, like every other month. So it's all basically Eastern Europe. It's funny. I've written a few poems about them, but not a great deal for some reason. I seem to, whatever concerns I have about them, I seem to have transitioned those concerns into concerns about other peoples and other populations. And I did write a whole book of erasure poems about refugees, but it was placed in Syria. So I don't know, maybe it's just easier for me to deal with if I'm not dealing with my own ancestors directly. I don't know. That might take a couple sessions on a couch to figure out why I'm doing it that way. So.
Thank you.
Great question. So if I don't hear any more questions, let's move on to, I always call it, this is the dessert part of the program. Now I don't know, I have some fascination with witnessing. I don't know, I guess watching the movie Witness, I watched that again with Harrison Ford. Oh, must have been a couple months ago, and I was still, wow. Yeah. Witnessing. So Margo, let's start with you. What does witnessing mean for you now?
I guess what I would say is trying to deal with subjects that are important in the world, subjects that are difficult to address, like subjects like, you know, the sixth extinction and what's happening to, you know, in my book, The End of Horses, I write a lot of poems about what we're doing to animals, what the impact of humans' encroachment on animal habitat, and trying to make that kind of a clear situation, because it's so important for us to try to start dealing with some of these issues before it's too late. And in many cases, it's already too late.
So is there a poem, Kathy's calling it, your political poems of witness. I don't know if there's a subgenre in your book, but I didn't know if there's one that came to mind.
A poem in particular that comes to mind? I mean, I guess I have a lot of poems in this book that could come to mind. I don't know exactly where to start, but I'll read Ballot of the Dolphin, which I guess I wrote after many hundreds of dolphins washed up on the shore of France. And I had taken notes on the fact that the fishing industry catches huge numbers of dolphins and kills them just because they're bycatch or competing with their attempts to fish for tuna. And it's been going on since the 80s. And now the European dolphin is on the verge of extinction. And you can see pictures of them just on like 100 dolphins, dead dolphins that they've killed. And this happens routinely. Ballad of the Dolphin. Ancient Greeks said they should be treated as humans. Their sailors would not kill dolphins. How I have thought of you caught in the fishermen's nets. They would set them to trap you to catch the tuna that swam under your schools. How the fishermen hung you still alive upside down. Your cries brought others. Fishermen grabbed you by your tail, strung you and turned you head down in water, tied you to lifting hooks and dragged you to the docks. If any of you were still alive when they slung you on cement, they stabbed you. How last survivors churned the water red, leaping in panic, waiting to die. In a good catch, it took them 3 days to kill all of you. How mothers whose calves were entangled could not lift them to the surface. They listened to their helpless underwater clicks and sighs. How often I remember the whale skippers who would radio the location of hundreds of you, allowing tuna fishermen to track down your entire pod. Their nets deep, foaming, wide, so that hundreds could fit inside. How they used underwater sound to confuse and drive you down. How many of you drowned. Fishermen did not want to compete with you, but killing you was not enough. How they used the screams of several to slaughter more. How one of you hangs from the prow, still alive, calling, calling.
Woo. Wow.
And I'm donating any proceeds that I make, and more than that, to the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, one of the organizations that's trying to do something about the lawlessness of the sea as well, because there are a lot of these fishermen that are, if you watch the film Seaspiracy, you'll see what it's on Netflix, and you can see what I'm talking about. And it also talks about Sea Shepherd Conservation Society.
Nice. No, very, very, really, really powerful poem. Very powerful. Thank you. So, Susana, how does witnessing sit with you?
I think I think I'm very interested in inequities in power, and they've that has played a role in my writing. And I just thinking about it right now, I realize I've also written a lot about war in various contexts. The chapbook that I wrote 20 years ago that won the Slappering Hall Press chapbook competition, which by the way is open. If you know people, if you have friends who have not yet published a full-length collection or a chapbook, they should go on to the Hudson Valley Writers Center website and look at the tab for Slappering Hall Press, which has a page of guidelines for submitting to this competition. But that's how I originally met Margo and the other poets at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. And that was a collection about set with a group of mathematicians in what was then Poland, but is now Ukraine, right before World War II. And I mentioned the Erasure book on Syria as well. And in my most recent collection, The Damage Done, I'm not focused on war per se. I'm really, what generated the poems in that collection were a concern about and an interest in FBI malfeasance stemming from the J. Edgar Hoover years, in which the FBI had a program, COINTELPRO, which illegally targeted progressive groups in various ways, illegal surveillance, illegal breaking in and gathering of evidence, et cetera, in an attempt to destroy those groups and those people. But in the process of setting that book in the late 60s and early 70s, it became inevitable that I would also have to consider the Vietnam War, at least in the form of a poem. And so there is one poem in that collection which addresses what was probably the longest and deadliest battle of the Vietnam War, the Battle of Khe Sanh in 1968. And this was a battle that lasted 77 days between the US Marines and the People's Army of North Vietnam. And it was a very controversial, well, the whole war was controversial, but this battle was also controversial within that larger controversy, because the government had the idea that the Marine base had to be defended at any cost. But what happened was it created a diversion so that defending the base led to the communist troops being able to build up their forces elsewhere. And so what followed was the Tet Offensive, which some of you may remember. And after the Tet Offensive, the American people, their support for the war, however tenuous it might have been before, it weakened. And so when we look at the Vietnam War, I mean, more than 50,000 Americans were killed in the Vietnam War, which was a lot at the time. I mean, now when we look at how many people have died from COVID, it doesn't seem like a very large number, but it was a large number, and 150,000 others were wounded seriously enough to require time in a hospital. And if you look at who was injured and who was killed, it has been estimated that 80% of those who fought in that war were from either working class or impoverished backgrounds. And that is also the case of the brother of the detective that is portrayed in this poem from The Damage Done, which is titled, "A Free Fire Zone Means Anything That Moves Can Be Shot." Talking again about how green everything was, the fire and smoke, the mountains and silence, the jungle, which he never gets past when he tries to tell the story of how anything that moves is shot. and he was shot. And here he is now in their parents' home instead of a rat's ass chronic care veterans facility. Has been like this for years, body broken, shrapnel still in his head, trying to talk to his older brother, the detective, who's wondering if the kid wants to die because someone now will have to do it for him. And all he had needed to do was stall a little bit. The war was winding down, or be some other place on some other hill, not that hill where nothing will ever grow back, a monument to ill conception, instead of here now, crying again, some spittle on his lips.
Very nice, very nice. Margo, another witnessing poem. That last one was, it was powerful, but it was almost shocking. The treatment that animals have to undergo at our hands.
Right, it's true. Yeah, absolutely. And I thought I'd read the title poem. I was going to say, Susana's planning to read The Colonel by Carolyn Porcher, and that which kind of, I think, inspired this poem in some ways. End of Horses. I write to you from the end of the time zone. You must realize that nothing survived after the horses were slaughtered. We sleep below the hollow, burned out stars. We look into dust bowls searching for horses. When you walk in the country, you will be shocked to meet substantial masses on the road. We do not know whom to blame or where the horses were driven, who slaughtered them, or for what purpose. Had the horses slept under the linden trees, the generals and engineers pucker and snore on the veranda.
Have another one for us? You're on a roll.
It's so hard to decide what to read. I thought I might read one from my first book, Frozen Spring, which was published in 2002. And it was written during the time of the Pinochet regime. And the Chilean song, so what I was really thinking about were the songs of Victor Jara, who was a singer-songwriter and who supported Allende. And he had just been reelected in a democratic election. And actually the United States supported Allende's being murdered and supported the coup. And Jara was hauled into a stadium, and they broke his hands when he was trying to play his guitar, and they shot him 43 times. But anyway, that's just to say what inspired the Chilean songs that are referred to in this poem. It's titled Conversation with Bertolt Brecht, and it begins with an epigraph by Brecht. Solely because of the increasing disorder in our cities of class struggle, some of us have now decided to speak no more of cities by the sea, snow on roofs, women. As if the Chilean songs of revolution would bring back the gray fishing boats, sailing through frail, deepening waters at dawn, and the seagulls making earthly sounds. As if these songs could restore the balance, the driven leaf, nail old and rusted, shoved through the bent bough. Each step through mirrors brings us back to the pitch of sleeplessness, the unstrung dream, an oil slick on an ocean still and black. As if all the songs of revolution could bring the murmuring tree back, could restore wind to the rigging, full sail to the morning light. How many years, messages, wars, strange incidences, ironies. The wary eye of the mother wanted to protect her child, promise more, cities near the sea, clear waters, full sail, the morning light.
Yeah, very nice, very nice.
Thank you.
So Susana, just back to you, but I want to, the title of your book reminds me of a Neil Young song.
Yes.
The Needle and the Damage Done. That's one of my,
yes,
that's a
yes.
classic.
Yes, of course. I'm not talking so much about drugs in my book,
Yeah.
although the protagonist, the main character, does have a drug problem, but the damage done refers to the damage done to progressive groups and people by the COINTELPRO, that particular program. So yeah, Margo said I wanted to read the Colonel, and the reason I wanted
let's do that. Yeah.
is a Carolyn Forche poem. And the reason I wanted to read this is, for me, this is the iconic witnessing poem. And perhaps because, as I talked about in interest in war, this is set during a war in the 70s, the Civil War in El Salvador. And it's a particularly chilling witness poem. So this is The Colonel by Carolyn Forche. What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. On the windows, there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner, rack of lamb, good wine. A gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, say nothing. The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There is no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it in a water glass. It came alive there. I am tired of fooling around, he said. As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go fuck themselves. He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of his wine in the air. Something for your poetry, no, he said. Some of the ears on the floor caught the scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground.
Ooh. Yeah, I've heard that a couple times. It's
Yeah.
still powerful every time I hear it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, the sack of ears as a objective correlative of just how many were killed, in a sense, this whole bag full of them.
So let's have another time for the audience to ask some questions. If you have some questions about refuge, witnessing, Broadstone books. Obviously, we're going to get video of the Italy trip coming up, so we're going to have that soon. Anybody, any questions?
Well, one thing, Susana, I'm not sure that you mentioned that Susana and Mervyn Taylor and I are co-editors of Slapping Hall Press. And so also we publish another chapbook series, which is called the Conversation Series. This is one with Dorianne Lux. I read her poem as a poem from someone else, which you heard already. But anyway, the well-known poet chooses an emerging poet to appear in the same chapbook, and there's a conversation at the end. And we've had the opportunity to publish Elizabeth Alexander, let's see, Denise Duhamel, and they chose, Elizabeth chose Leroy Van Cleef Stefanon, we've also gotten to publish Kim Adonisio, Kimiko Han, and we are currently going to be publishing Ellen Bass. We've published Toy Daracot last year, and also who was the other one? There was another.
Did you mention Kim Adonisio?
Yeah, I mentioned Kim, but there's still one of the ones after her. Anyway, we published great poets, and they've chosen amazing, mentees to appear in the same chapbook with them, with an interview at the end.
Yeah. Nice. Any questions or comments? Michael, I knew you got one saved up. Come on, push it out. Only kidding. I think you usually have some kind of question or comment.
Yeah, I'm just enjoying the reading so much today. So incredible.
Should we read some more poems if people don't have questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, yeah, we have 11 minutes, so go ahead.
Well, maybe I'll read a quick one, which was inspired when I went to visit one of my sons who runs an organic farm in East Concord, New Hampshire. And I don't know if people have had the opportunity to visit New Hampshire, but one of the unfortunate realities is that in the spring and summer, ticks have multiplied to such an extent that it's just almost impossible to go anywhere in New Hampshire without being swarmed by ticks. And the problem is we can deal with it because we have all sorts of ways of dealing with it, but the moose babies can't. And so they're dying out, and it's so incredibly tragic. And I'm sure there would be a solution to this problem if people would, these scientists who are so brilliant would turn their minds to it, but I don't think people are doing that. And so they're dying out. Good. And this is what the poem is about. Ghost moose. Searching for moose, the children run down to the river, calling the already gone, the forgotten, to wallow in stench, the smell of skunk weeds. Moose calves become ghosts, rubbing fur, skin, scraping ticks off on tree bark. In mild winters, ticks multiply and multiply, occupy moose calves, killing them slowly. Their mothers witness starvation from blood loss. Moose calves resemble ghosts, tearing fur, skin. Calves waste away, wasted bodies frighten the forest floor. Foresters call April the month of death.
Wow. Have another one for us?
Yeah, I have a long one, but I don't think you want to hear a long one, do you? I mean, it's like, I don't know how long, I didn't time it, but
Go for it. Just do it.
Okay, this is one that was written after Jubilate Agnew by Christopher Smart, and is really one of the first eco poems ever written, and he wrote it about his cat. For I will consider the North American beaver. For the beaver is the largest rodent in North America and the second largest on Earth. For the human desecration of the beaver and carrier pigeon ignited the conservation movement. For the beaver, a keystone creature, creates watersheds that are hubs of flourishing ecosystems. For first, they are supreme environmentalists who provide hollows and felled trees for the nesting raccoons, squirrels, owls, ducks, and golden eyes. For secondly, the beaver is a symbol of industry and the national animal of Canada. For thirdly, beavers have created verdant soil for the farmland in the valleys of the northern part of North America. For fourthly, the beaver engineered habitats prevent erosion, reduce risk of flash floods, maintain water in streams throughout the year, and fortify trout. For fifthly, the weight of the beaver pond bears down into the earth and restores groundwater. For sixthly, beavers and their ponds, wetlands, and meadows have provided nourishment to the brown creepers, nutcrackers, moose, trumpeter swans, and coho salmon. For seventhly, songbirds rest upon coppicing willows and ducks nest along the edges of their ponds. For eighthly, by gnawing down trees and dense forests, beavers provide sunlight and photosynthesis to support food webs, pond insects shelter in their lodges and dams. For ninthly, beavers are balletic and ingenious in water, and their transparent eyelids permit them to see while swimming. For tenthly, the beaver is monogamous and endowed with familial fidelity. For the beaver's young help care for siblings and assist their parents in repairing dams and lodges. For their second pair of fur-lined lips allows them to close their mouths in water while hauling on gnawing on wood. For beavers can hold their breath underwater for 15 minutes. For the beaver's 4 chisel-shaped teeth perpetually grow to replace that which is ground down from chewing bark, and the outer enamel of their teeth is thick and tinged orange with iron compounds. For the beaver's fur is waterproof, soft, and warm, with 126,000 hairs in a postage stamp size patch. For beaver pelts were a major part of the North American fur trade, beginning in the 1500s, that was so rapacious as to come close to driving the beaver to extinction. For early colonists, such as the Pilgrim, paid bills from England with beaver pelts. For Lewis and Clark were astounded by the beaver's productive work, and Thoreau deemed them righteous creatures. For the Blackfeet believed the beavers were the most valuable partners and prohibited killing them. For in Massachusetts today, lizards and turtles proliferate and fish abound near beaver dams. For in the Western mountains, beavers' wetlands cover the smallest area, but the greatest biodiversity exists around them. For in North Carolina, the endangered St. Francis satyr butterfly finds safe haven only in beaver meadows and wetlands. For no other animal besides the human is an equal of the beaver in engineering of the natural world. For in 1948, when Idaho Fish and Game trapped 76 beavers out of Payette Lake in the town of McCall and dropped them by parachute into Idaho's Chamberlain Basin, all but one survived to create new thriving beaver communities. For the beaver's tail contains fat deposits used as energy when needed, as a rudder when swimming, and as a seat when in repose. For beavers slap the water with their flat tails to warn their family of impending danger. In 2017, to protect their local wildflower attraction on a man-made island in a man-made lake, a New York environmental organization kill-trapped an entire beaver family.
Thank you.
It was long.
I think I found out more about animals today than I knew before. No, it's great. Absolutely fantastic, fantastic. Susana, do you want to close us out with a poem as we end our time? Yeah.
So this one, the reference in this poem is to an explosion. Some of you might remember in March of 1970 at a townhouse at 18 West 11th Street in New York City, in which members of the Weather Underground were making the nail bomb that's described in the poem and additional bombs for the library at Columbia University. So 3 people were killed in the townhouse and 2 others were present but survived and fled. And you also may be familiar with the James Merrill poem, which he wrote after the bombing of the house 18 West 11th Street. So this is COINTELPRO portrait with blasts. Another young woman, former teacher, hates being rich. The revolution is here. She puts her dividends from the family corporation into the collective's common fund. The Black Panthers laugh at them, summertime soldiers. Townhouse basement on West 11th Street, house where the poet James Merrill was a toddler, house of the parents on vacation in St. Kitts of one of the other bombers. The bomb goes off too soon, meant for that evening, an Army base dance for non-commissioned officers and their dates at Fort Dix. They find pieces of bodies shot through with roofing nails, the nails shrapnel to increase the radius of destruction. Air of ash, wood, glass, hail of grit, and cracked plaster. In the basement, 4 12-inch lead pipes packed with dynamite from the New England Explosives Corporation, blasting caps, and cheap alarm clocks. 2 50-pound cases of dynamite, enough to destroy every townhouse on the block. A detached fingertip matches that of the former teacher on file from the days of rage. 2 male would-be bombers, dead 2, 1 crushed. All this will fail to end the war. About the obliteration, it was nothing egocentric, her father tells the press.
Woo, what a poetry hour. Thank you. Just for amazing duet. We handed off the ball well, back and forth. And now, thank you very much. What a powerful and inspiring hour. So.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us.
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your talent with us. Thank you to the audience for joining us. This recording will be available from the Stockbridge Library website. And I look forward to seeing many of you in future weeks for our poetry gatherings. Have a great afternoon.
Yeah, and this is it for Poetry Month. So thank you for closing it out.